Remember to visit Dan's Dinosaurs for all your Nanmu dinosaur needs. Dan consistently offers great discounts on pre-orders, and as always, if you choose to shop from him, be sure to mention that your friend Killer Shrew Fan sent you in the comments section at checkout. Now with that out of the way, let's get on to the review. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Nanmu November. Today we're going to be taking a look at their Stegosaurus nicknamed Pike. This figure was released in 2020 with the typical level of Nanmu accuracy, thundering onto the scene as the go-to Lost World Stegosaurus model. But despite its obvious appeal, it actually took me a little bit longer to acquire it than most. I only got my hands on it through a fellow collector this past summer, but boy, am I glad that I did. This figure looks amazing as a Jurassic Stegosaurus. We've seen some wannabes and placeholders in the past, but this is the real deal, and I'm so excited to finally take a closer look at it on the channel. So let's do this. So if we start at the head of the figure, as we usually do, you can see that Nanmu have captured that tapering skull shape before adorning it with some lovely muscle tones in the cheeks and brows of the animal. Then of course you have got the shallow wrinkles and leathery skin texture sculpted across those basic forms and sculptural ideas. I won't say it's the most intricate and well done aspect of the sculpt, but the surface area is pretty small here, so it gets the job done. You can see that the eyes are done in a deep brown with a little bit of gloss to give this stego some pupper eyes, and the beak has been weathered with paint rather than actual sculpted striations. The neck is quite stocky, very different from our modern understanding of Stegosaurus. I think it goes without saying that this isn't meant to be a scientific model, and so it obviously lacks the throat armor, but it's still well sculpted with tensing bundles of muscles, leathery skin textures, and wrinkles, and you can see how the plates begin about a quarter of the way down the neck there before proceeding down the spine in that staggered manner. And as we ourselves proceed down the body, you can see that Nanmu really did nail the texture on this one, recreating the sort of leathery crosshatch elephant-style skin work that we see on the dinosaurs in the film. I also really like how the folds sort of stretch over the swell of the gut there, as well as all of those tension lines and hanging areas of skin you see down around the limbs. The movement of that just feels really well done here. The tail is held rigid, and you can see how the leathery skin work continues down the length up to the spikes of the thagomizer. While we're here, here's a good look at that iconic element of the animal. You can see that the spikes have been stained with dark washes to really give it an extra lived-in quality. All of the detail is then replicated on the opposite side of the figure as we lead back up to the tiny head. As far as the elephant-like legs of the model go, the forelimbs are proportionally shorter than the hind limbs, and you can see that one has been sculpted partially curled up to sell the look of the figure being in mid-stride. The muscle tones, particularly in those rounded shoulders, have been well captured. Again, we have the leathery skin texture with some nice folds around the joints, and the toe claws are done with those pachyderm-style nails. The hind limbs are much the same story, only a lot stockier. I like how the pillar-like calves just sort of feed into the ankles, and you can see that the back right foot is bracing and creating all of these lovely folds around the toes. Just another way that all of these sculpt work really helps to sell the movement behind the pose. Moving along the underbelly, you can get an idea of the figure's girth, as well as where all of that hanging skin just sort of gathers and bunches in on itself around the swell of the gut and limbs of the figure. Nanmu really haven't left any surface area unattended to here. But perhaps one of my favorite aspects of this sculpt would be the plates. I always loved the almost bark-like surface texture of the plates of the Stegosaurus from the Lost World. It gave the animals an almost fantastical appearance that spoke to their connection to nature. This element of the design would unfortunately be walked back with the Jurassic World iteration of the species, so I'm glad Nanmu chose to take cues from the original with their offering. And of course, it's all very well executed with dark washes in place to help all of those striations and ridges be immediately noticeable at any distance. You can even see how they've sort of been quote-unquote weathered with green tones that give the plates an almost aged, mossy appearance. As far as the pose goes, like I said, it has been sculpted mid-stride with that left leg up while the right limb braces. This in and of itself is enough to make it look like it's right out of the scene where the herd lumbers past Malcolm, Nick, and Eddie, but then there's also a very slight lean to the figure, which gives it the appearance of a hurried gait. So maybe this is better suited for a recreation of the Stegosaurus that rushed Sarah as she hid in the log. So yeah, overall, I am very pleased with the sculpt on this thing. The overall forms, proportions, and textures are all very screen accurate, making this the quintessential unofficial Lost World Stegosaurus sculpt. Unfortunately, it does suffer from some seam lines, most notably around the limbs at the shoulders and hips there. The tail also has a distinct seam, but luckily all of these do disappear at a distance thanks to the skin texture, so well done to Nanmu for managing to disguise those inevitable facets of the sculpt. As far as the paint scheme goes, this is one of two variants, with the second being a much more saturated green with stripes and orange plates, and whereas I felt that was a good classic color scheme for Stegosaurus, of course I was drawn to the more screen accurate deco here. I remember there was a bit of a stink when Nanmu changed the color scheme on people, but I don't know, I felt like this version turned out looking a bit more accurate than the first. Maybe they could have split the diff, keeping the more saturated greens of the original while introducing more of the creams and browns of the final product here, but I don't know, I'm happy with this. There's a ton of paint on this thing, a lot of golden washes in that skin work, some nice burgundy breakup sprinkled throughout, and the gradient to the lighter legs and feet is always an appealing design element. So yeah, as always, bang up job on every technical level with this one. When it comes to Nanmu, what did you expect? As far as the size of the figure goes, you're looking at around 11.5 inches long or just past 29 centimeters, while at its highest point, you're looking at just over 5 inches off the ground or around 13 centimeters. When it comes to the size of the animals from the film, I've seen everything from 11 to 19 feet tall, and I don't even know if that's taking into consideration the cut carcass from Fallen Kingdom that was absolutely massive, but either way, from the sizes that I found, that would put this model in anywhere between 126 to 146 scale. To be in that 135 scale area, the figure would have to represent a specimen between 14 to 15 feet tall at the plates. For size comparisons, let's start off with some other Stegosaurus models. First up, here it is with the Stegosaurus, another piece obviously inspired by the animals of the Lost World, and whereas for the time this was a fine placeholder figure for those of us who couldn't afford an official maquette or anything of the sort, I think it's safe to say that it crumbles in the light of Nanmu's offering here. Now that isn't to disparage Papo's work, as like I said, it was and still is a very well sculpted and painted model for the price point, which by the way is half the cost of this Nanmu figure, but it does help put things in perspective and remind us that we are truly living in the golden age of dinosaur model production. Then of course we have the REBOR offering. This is their Stegosaurus Garden, the plain variant, and although this figure wasn't necessarily trying to be the Lost World Stegosaurus, it's clear to see that the color scheme was at least greatly inspired by the designs of the film. That made this another potential placeholder for diehard fans looking for something to fill out their Sorna displays, and whereas I have become a much bigger fan of REBOR than I used to be, I gotta say, I think Nanmu have once again taken the cake when it comes to their technical execution. And now we have the Mega Destroyer Stegosaurus from the Mattel Dino Escape line. I always love comparing the toys to the models of the movie creatures. It's fun for me. Next up, here it is with the PNSO gang. You have the original Bieber and the Redux version that came with the Hatchling Stegosaurus, and this is another comparison I always love to do. The movie design next to our latest understandings of what the actual animal looked like. I don't know, it's just cool to see, and yes, it is possible to appreciate both. As a final Stegosaurus comparison, here it is with the Batat Stego, just for fun, which came out, I believe, around the same time as the Jurassic films themselves, so even if you're not a huge fan of the design we got in the movie, just know it could always be worse. Now for some Nanmu comparisons. First up, gotta bring in the Bull Rex. I know I haven't officially reviewed this figure on the channel just yet. I just got around to putting together that unboxing, but since they were film contemporaries, I feel I must do this comparison, and boy do they look great with one another. The fleeing pose of the Stegosaurus combined with the downward look of the king really creates a great display, and one that feels right out of the novels. And speaking of Sorna contemporaries, here it is with the Nanmu Spinosaurus Supplanter, and you can see that that long, tall, and handsome figure stands head and shoulders above Pike here. Next, here it is with the Ankylosaurus, another dinosaur that made its first appearance on Site B. And finally, here's Pike with Ranger, the Carnotaurus, and even though the Carno only showed up in Fallen Kingdom, it was in the novel, so there you go. Now for some Morris information, friends. First up, here it is with Bastion, the Apatosaurus, and as you can see, I can't even get that long figure in frame. And Pike's tallest plate doesn't even reach up to Bastion's head, so yeah, that's a big figure! But of course, the obligatory comparison I have to make is with Stegosaurus' mortal enemy, the Allosaurus. This is Nanmu's figure Blade. I gotta say, I love the look of these two together, and they're actually not terrible in regards to their scales, so they do work fairly well as companion pieces, I must say. And then, of course, we have Chris Pratt. Wouldn't be much of a Nanmu review without him showing up in one way or another. And that was the Nanmu Stegosaurus Pike, and I do think this is yet another win from the company. Say what you will about the amount of unofficial Jurassic-inspired products in the dinosaur collecting market, I truly think no one before or since has done it better than Nanmu, and I am so glad to finally have a decent Lost World Stegosaurus on my pop culture shelf. Well sculpted, well painted, and screen accurate. What more could you want? I definitely dig it, and I'm sure you will too. But as always, I want to know what you guys think of this figure. Do you own it yet? Are you planning on picking it up? And what is your favorite Stegosaurus model of all time? Drop a comment down below with all of your thoughts, and thank you once again for tuning in to today's episode of Nanmu November. Take care out there, and bye-bye.